Hello everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I of course am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am very excited to bring you all another discography ranking. So today I'm going to be discussing all of the studio releases from new wave of British heavy metal legends Raven. Raven, for those of you who are unaware of who this band are, they are, as I said, they are classic new wave of British heavy metal, one of the kind of leaders of that whole movement, even though they never really achieved the same level of fame or success as, say, Iron Maiden or Saxon. They're still nonetheless, I think, one of the more notable bands to come out of that whole movement. And yeah, I really enjoy this band, and I think most of their albums are pretty good, although there are a couple stinkers, which obviously we will discuss. So we're going to be discussing all 15 of their studio albums. We're not counting EPs, demos, compilations, any of that stuff. Just their 15 studio releases, which is, a decent number. But yeah, this band's been around forever, so of course you naturally expect them to have a lot of albums. So without further ado, enough of my ramblings, let's just get right into this discography ranking. Of course, we are starting at the bottom of the pile, and my number 15 choice is The Pack Is Back, released in 1986. I hate this album. First of all, this fucking album cover. I know I bitch a lot about, album arts in these videos, but having, a good album cover is important. You could not pay me to wear a shirt of this or have a poster of this. It's a fucking horrible album cover. But this is just, a really bad album. This was their, I guess, second foray into more commercial territory, and I don't know, everything you love about Raven is not on this album. This is them trying to be Def Leppard with some Huey Lewis in the News energy kind of thrown in there. These songs are just bad. They're not heavy, they're boring, they're poppy, they're just, again, it's just a limp, listless album. This feels again, it's just them trying to be commercials, them trying to sound like an American pop metal. This album is barely even metal, to be honest. This just is a pop rock album at certain spots, and again, big Huey Lewis in the News vibes all over this album, which, no disrespect to Huey Lewis in the News, but I don't want to be reminded of them when I'm listening to Raven, right? I want classic British heavy metal, and this is not it. This album is bad. I don't like a single thing about this album. I think the production sucks. I think everything about this album is just bad, frankly. This is my clear-cut, dead last Raven album. Again, everything you love about Raven is just not on this album. Pack Is Back. This album just sucks. The Pack Is Back. Can the Pack leave, please? Because if this is the Pack, I don't want the Pack to be around. This album sucks. Moving on, I really have nothing else to say. Pack Is Back. My clear-cut, dead last Raven album. This album is kind of a pile of shit. Alright, moving on now to my number 14 choice. It is Glow, released in 1994. This isn't as bad as The Pack Is Back, but this is very much kind of in the same vein of The Pack Is Back, where this is Raven trying to not sound like Raven. This is them trying to get out of their comfort zone, which is maybe admirable, but this album also just kind of sucks. This is, again, I get it, 1994 was a very strange time, for metal. Obviously you had, the grunge thing was really taking off, and the whole kind of alternative metal thing was really taking off at this point. You had Pantera, you had, all the groove metal bands that were popping up, and being a classic heavy metal band in the 90s was pretty rough. A bunch of them really kind of suffered during this whole time, and unfortunately I think Raven became one of those victims of the 90s. This album, it's just very, 90s sounding. There's a couple, decent moments on this album, but for the most part, it just doesn't sound like Raven. This album reminds me more of, Soundgarden, but, being played by, Angel Witch. It's just kind of an odd, very uneven album. I don't like the production on this album. This just feels like Raven, trying to be, a 90s alternative metal band, just, again, just deviating so far from, what they're good at, and it's just not a good album, really. Overall, Glow, it's not as bad as The Pack Is Back, but I still really probably would never return to this album, just because there's really nothing to latch onto here. So yeah, for me, Glow, it's not dead last, but it is second to last. It's really not, it's a very skippable album, honestly. Taking the number 13 spot on my list, it is Stay Hard, released in 1985. This was their first kind of foray into more commercial territory. it's not as bad as The Pack is Back, but this album still is just not really that good in my opinion. Like this just sounds like Raven trying to be like an American hair metal band, and just again, like the songs the songs are just boring. It's poppy. It is like heavier than The Pack is Back. It's still metal. Like I'll give it that. But this album is just dumb. Like the lyrics are dumb. The songs are dumb. They're just not interesting. They're not well written. I mean, again, there's a couple, like, decent moments on this album. Like, I do actually kind of like the song On and On, which actually was, like, a pretty sizable hit for them, and honestly was the first Raven song I heard, so, yeah, this was my first, like, Raven album, kind of in a way, which definitely is not the best introduction to this band. But, yeah, overall, I don't think this album is, like, terrible per se, but it's just dumb. This is just an incredibly dumb album. Like, this reminds me of, like, Def Leppard, like, when they were going for a more commercial direction, or like Saxon when they tried to be like kind of more glam metal. This just kind of fits right in there. This just blends in with the Pack. It really doesn't stand out much at all. So for me, Stay Hard, it's not the worst thing I've ever heard, but again, it's just a dumb album. It's not interesting, and again, it's not what I want out of a Raven album. It doesn't have much on here that I really like. So for me, Stay Hard, it's 13. Not the worst, but so far from the best. Moving on now to my number 12. It is One for All, released in 2000. Not to be confused with their album All for One, which, yeah, that's a thing that they did. I think I'm going to say we kind of gotten away from the albums that I think are just kind of flat out bad to the albums that I think are, at the very least, kind of decent. This is a decent album. But I do have quite a few gripes with this album. For one, I think this is their worst sounding album on the production front. The drums especially. I think the drums on this album sound terrible. I don't know what it is. Like, they sound fake. It might be a drum machine. I don't think it is, but it might be. It sounds terrible. And yeah, the production of this album is just very bad. It's still kind of that 90s, like, listless production, but the songs are, like, better. Like, this is Raven kind of, getting back to what they're good at, which is, again, just, classic British heavy metal, speed metal, that kind of style. And there's a couple decent songs on here, like Roll With The Punches, I thought was a pretty decent song. Kangaroo, I thought was a pretty good song. Overall, this is just not my favorite album, though. For the most part, I think these songs are just kind of boring. They do kind of blend together. I think this album is quite drawn out, too, at over 50 minutes long. It's just kind of, I don't know, it's just kind of a there album, really. It's pretty forgettable, honestly. Again, a couple decent songs, but overall, in terms of, like, Raven albums, this isn't one I'm going to reach for right away. It's better than the ones below it, but they have much, much better albums than this. So for me, One for All, it's number 12. It's not the best. Coming in now at number 11, it is Everything Louder, released in 1997. This album and One for All, for me, are pretty interchangeable, honestly. I think this album, like, this was a kind of return to form after Glow, which was just, again, kind of a weird, very disjointed album. This was them, again, just kind of getting back to their sound. And again, some good songs on here. I like Insane, Between the Wheels. You do get some of that, again, you get that classic Raven sound, but I just think they did it a lot better on other albums. I think the production of this album is better than One for All, but it's still, like, not my favorite production. It's still kind of got that 90s sound that I kind of am not overly huge on. Yeah, for me, this is just, it's an okay album, but again, it's kind of forgettable. It's just, more middle, bottom of the pack, just because they have other albums that I think are a lot better. So for me, Everything Louder, again, it's a perfectly decent return to form, but they got way better even after this album, and the early material is definitely way better than this. So for me, Everything Louder, it's number 11. Cracking the top 10 now, we have Extermination, released in 2015. I have one major complaint about this album, and that is, it is simply too long. This album is over an hour long, and I don't really see any reason why it has to be as long as it is. Like, honestly, a lot of these songs feel just kind of like filler tracks, which, there are some standout tracks, again, I'll give it that. Like, Battle March / Tank Treads, I thought was an awesome song. Thunder Down Under is a banger. But a lot of these songs don't really stand out. They just, again, they feel like kind of like filler tracks. They don't really gel too well. Well, they do gel too well. They just don't really stand out. That's what I meant to say. And just overall, it's a perfectly fine album. I would probably return to this one at least over all the other ones that were before it. but still, again, it's just too long. It lacks like a ton of standout tracks. I do think this album is better. I think at this point Raven have kind of figured out, how to get like at least decent production, and like, again, they do sound like kind of a bit more inspired on this album than on some of the previous releases, but like not like completely inspired, if that makes sense. Extermination, not a whole lot to add. Again, my biggest complaint is that it is simply far too long for its own good. Which I guess is kind of a weird trend for a lot of like modern old school bands where they just have albums that are way too long. I don't really know why they do that, but that's just kind of a thing they do. But yeah, for me, Extermination, it's number 10. It cracked the top 10 at least, but they have way better albums than this, so yep, it's number 10. Entering the single-digit zone now, my number 9 choice is Walk Through Fire, released in 2009. I like this album. I think this is a pretty good album. It kind of suffers from the same problem as some of the previous albums, where it's a bit bloated, it's a bit too lengthy, but it's not like a giant like complaint on this one. I think it's less bloated than, say, Extermination. And there are some really kick-ass songs on this album, like the opening track, Against the Grain. I think that song is awesome. The title track is really good. I think the song Trainwreck is awesome. Overall, I dig this album, like, quite a lot. Like, this was, like, kind of like the real kind of return to form. This was their longest gap in between studio albums, like 9 years between this one and One for All, which, yeah, quite a lengthy gap. So I think they, took a much-needed break and kind of, recouped a bit of their energy and figured out some stuff, and they came back with, honestly, a banger of an album. Like, I do like this album. I mean, it is number 9, so it is kind of, more, again, middle of the road. But overall, I do honestly, like, really like this album. Again, if they maybe could have just trimmed off some of the fat, I hope this album might have gone higher. I like the production of this album. It's a little more modern sounding, but it's still got that, old school energy. And yeah, this album, I just like it. It sounds a lot more inspired than some of their previous releases to this one. I just think this is a really cool album. So yeah, for me, Walk Through Fire, it's not my favorite, but it's number 9. It's definitely better than some of their other ones. But again, they just have other albums that are better. Moving on now to my number 8 spot. It is Nothing Exceeds Like Excess, released in 1988. Out of their more, I guess, like kind of classic era, this is admittedly, I don't think, as strong as some of their previous material. But this is still a really good album. Some absolutely kick-ass songs on this album. Into the Jaws of Death, I think that song is awesome. In the Name of the Lord is a really cool song. Lay Down the Law. I think the production of this album is like a little less clear. This does also kind of feel like a bit of a transitional album in a way between the previous album and the next album, which we'll get to those later. Like, this does kind of feel like maybe a transitional album, especially on the production front. Like, you listen to the production on this album and the production on the follow-up to this album, and it's kind of close, but I feel like the follow-up kind of did it better. Overall, yeah, I do really enjoy this album. Again, it's number 8 just because there's other albums that I like more, but I would definitely return to this one. I do think it has, again, I think the songs I mentioned are absolutely kick-ass. I think this album is definitely better than some of their other material, but again, they just have other albums that I think are stronger, without a doubt, but Nothing Exceeds Like Excess, number 8. It is a pretty decent album. I definitely recommend you check it out if you haven't heard it. Check out all these albums, I mean, except for maybe the ones at the bottom, but still, listen to them, form your own opinion, but yeah, just listen to Raven if you haven't known, because this band kicks ass. Coming in now at number 7, it is All Hell's Breaking Loose from 2023, their newest studio offering. And this album kicks ass, honestly. I really, really dig this album. I'm kind of surprised. Like, this album and the previous album are insanely good, honestly, because, like this album, I really think these guys actually, like, finally kind of got their shit together. Like, they tried to, like, kind of get back together with, Walk Through Fire and Extermination, but again, those albums were just kind of, pretty bloated and just had a bunch of filler tracks. On this album and the previous album, it feels like they just took out all the filler and were like, fuck it, let's just focus on the best of the best songs and just write some kick-ass songs, and they did. This album is fucking awesome. Like, the Gallagher brothers are both in their 60s at this point, but they honestly don't sound like they're in their 60s. Like, they sound like a young and inspired band that's just, absolutely on a tear, and some absolutely kick-ass songs on this album. Surf the Tsunami, I thought was a banger. The title track is really cool. The Far Side, Victory's Call. I really dig this album. I like the production. Again, maybe a little bit kind of more modern sounding, but still got that old school charm that I really like. Love the album cover too. I love that, kind of comic book art style. That I just think that is really cool. I dig the shit out of this album, frankly. Again, if they sound young, they sound inspired, they sound energized. And yeah, this is just a really kick-ass album. Yeah, it's number 7, again, which is kind of more middle of the road, but I do really, really like this album. I would put it higher if I could, but again, there's just other albums I think are maybe slightly better, but All Hell's Breaking Loose, again, for a band that's as old as they are, this band formed back in 1974. They are older than Iron Maiden, for God's sakes. But honestly, they sound more inspired than Iron Maiden in their modern day. This album is kick-ass. So yeah, number 7, I could go on and on, but All Hell's Breaking Loose, check it out if you haven't. It's number 7. Coming in now at number 6, it is Metal City, released in 2020. This and All Hell's Breaking Loose are kind of interchangeable to me, although I do think this one is maybe slightly stronger. Again, this album is just kick-ass. Like, this does not sound like a band that has been around since the 70s. Like, this sounds like a young band, a new, fresh, energized band that is just here to, you know, party and here to kick doors down and just be awesome. And this album is awesome. I think all the tracks on this album are awesome. Some standout tracks for me would be The Power, Human Race, Cybertron, When Worlds Collide. I dig this album quite a lot. Again, I love the album cover, like that kind of comic book art style I think is really cool. Definitely suits the vibe of the music at all. This album, again, it's energized, it's energetic, it's a lot of fun to listen to. Like this, again, these guys sound like, for as old as they are, they sound like they're just really energized and really just, you know, trying to get at it. And yeah, overall, I dig this album a lot. Yeah, for me, Metal City, number 6. It doesn't quite beat out some of the more classic material for me, but I do dig this album nonetheless. So for me, Metal City, number 6. It's a kick-ass album, and again, just amazing. We're considering their age. Coming in now at number 5, it is All For One, released in 1983. Again, not to be confused with One For All, which, yeah, that's the thing they did. This is definitely a classic album. This is just a classic heavy metal album, and yeah, some absolutely kick-ass songs on here again. Like, Take Control, Mind Over Metal, the title track is a lot of fun, Undrawn and Quartered. I feel like on this album that you can kind of maybe sense a little bit that they're kind of going for a more commercial direction. Like, I feel like there's definitely less focus on just like kind of, you know, fast, intense, more speed metal oriented riffs, and there's kind of more emphasis, I feel like, on the choruses and kind of big sing-along parts, but it's not like full-blown like commercial slop like Stay Hard or The Pack Is Back. Again, it's just maybe slightly more commercial, a little bit more accessible, but it's still a really just kick-ass album. Production still kind of got that more raw, kind of, you know, gritty, just kind of garage rock kind of vibe, I feel like. And yeah, overall, this is just a classic, you know, heavy metal album. It's fun, it's anthemic, and yeah, again, it's very energetic. It's just a lot of fun to listen to. I dig this album a lot. All For One, it's just a classic album. It's number 5. It cracked the top 5. Yeah, not much else to say. All For One, it's a really fun album. It's number 5. And now at number 4, it is Architect of Fear, released in 1991. I was kind of surprised by this album, honestly. Like, this album really kind of snuck up on me. Like, going into this discography, I didn't think this album was going to be that high, because I remember listening to it and being like, man, not overly huge on it, but this album really snuck up on me. Like, this is definitely kind of them, I feel like, kind of adapting to the times a little bit. Like, this album is definitely heavier than some of their other material. Like, the production, like, the guitars are thicker, the drums have this, you know, nice big kind of thwack to them. Kind of has a darker, more sinister vibe, but honestly, I dig it. Like, it feels like Raven, like, still playing to their strengths, but just kind of adapting them in a way to, you know, suit the times of the 90s, where, again, classic heavy metal was kind of dying out, and, you know, it was kind of getting darker and heavier at this time, and I feel like they adapted it pretty well, and then kind of fucked things up with Glow, but again, that was the thing that happened. Overall, I do really dig this album, honestly. Like, there's some kick-ass songs. Like, the title track, I think, is really good. Got the Devil, Under the Skin, White Hot Anger is, like, honestly one of my favorite Raven songs ever. That song is fucking kick-ass. Like, borderline, like, thrash at some points. Yeah, overall, again, it's definitely different than some of their other material, but I don't think it's bad. I think it's a really good album. Like, again, it's them kind of adapting to the times, but not, like, you know, completely selling out or anything. Like, it's still very much sounds like Raven, just kind of a heavier, darker, more sinister kind of Raven. Again, going into this, I didn't think this album would land this high on my list, but it has. I really like this album. So for me, Architect of Fear, it's number 4. It does, again, not quite as good as some of their absolute classics, but honestly, I think this album's kind of an underrated gem, honestly. I don't really see many people talking about this album, but I think this album deserves more attention. Alright, and now we have entered the top 3, so my number 3 choice is Rock Until You Drop, released in 1981. This, of course, is their pretty classic debut, and this is a hell of a debut. This band just absolutely came out swinging, and yeah, this album is awesome. I really dig kind of the raw, demo-esque kind of production of this album. Again, it's kind of got this kind of garage rock vibe that I really dig. Again, that raw demo feel, I just really dig it. And overall, I think every single song on this album is pretty kick-ass. Some standout tracks for me would be Hell Patrol, Don't Need Your Money, the title track is a lot of fun, Tyrant of the Airways, which is the longest song on the album. I think that song is awesome. You get kind of a good balance. It's really a perfect introduction to this band, honestly, because you get a perfect balance of, I think, everything that this band does really well. Like, you get kind of the more intense kind of speed metal songs, but then you get the more kind of like anthemic, you know, classic, more traditional, I guess, new wave of British heavy metal stuff in here. Again, stuff that's more akin to like Iron Maiden or, you know, Saxon, stuff like that. You get kind of a perfect balance of all of that on this album. Like, I really think this is just kind of a perfect intro. If you were like kind of new to this band, this might be the album I would recommend, because honestly, you get pretty much everything like that this band does really well on this album. And again, this is, for a first effort, this is a really kick-ass album. Yeah, Rock Until You Drop, it's my number 3. I really dig this album. Again, I just think this is definitely one of the best, like, new wave of British heavy metal debuts, without a doubt. Alright, taking the number 2 spot on my list, it is Wiped Out, released in 1982. I see this album frequently cited as this band's finest album, and it's not hard to see why. This album is a goddamn ripper. Like, honestly, this is like one of the most intense new wave of British heavy metal albums out there. Like, this is honestly more speed metal than like classic heavy metal for the most part, but yeah, this album is just absolutely intense, honestly. Like, you listen to this album and you can hear where a ton of like thrash bands got so much of their inspiration from. Like, because I know Raven was a huge influence for like a ton of old school thrash bands, and you can hear a lot on this album. Like, every single song here it's intense, it's riffy, and it's just awesome, frankly. Faster Than the Speed of Light, the opening track, that song is absolutely awesome. Firepower is a lot of fun. To the Limit, To the Top, which is maybe a little bit more kind of dynamic, that song is awesome. Live at the Inferno, which is not a live track, which even though it kind of sounds like one, that song is awesome. Hold Back the Fire is a banger. Overall, I dig this album a lot. I think the production of this album, again, it's kind of got that raw kind of sound to it, and it really is just, again, I think this is honestly, like, almost, I wouldn't hesitate to call it a masterpiece of new wave of British heavy metal, really. I think this is kind of a flawless album. Like, I really have zero issues with this album, like, at all. Like, I think, again, all these songs, they're incredibly well written, they're intense, they're just riffy as all hell. The vocals on this album are great. Yeah, this is definitely them I think at their just, you know, freshest, at their most energetic, at their most just like, okay, like, we tried out with the debut and that worked out well. Let's just take the energy from the debut and just make it better. And they did. Wiped Out. This is an amazing album. If you have not heard it, you are missing out dearly. It is so close to my number 1, but obviously my number 1 edges it out just slightly. But Wiped Out, make no mistake, this album fucking kicks ass. And finally, we reach my number 1, which is Life's a Bitch, released in 1987. I love this album. This is like one of my favorite like classic heavy metal albums ever. This was a comeback. This is like a comeback album to end all comeback albums, because again, they tried and failed horrifically with The Pack is Back and Stay Hard, but this album is just like them saying fuck it, and we're back to just being who we are. We are Raven, and this, honestly, they could have called this album We Are Raven, and it would have fit perfectly. But Life's a Bitch, I think, is also a great title, and yeah, very true. But yeah, this album is just Raven going back to what they're perfect at, and honestly, I think this is their best material. Like, every single song on here is amazing. Again, the songs, they're just riffy as all hell. Not a single song in here blends together. They all stand out. They all just have amazing riffs. Like, the opening track, The Savage and the Hungry, that's like one of my favorite riffs ever. The title track is awesome. Iron League is such a banger. On the Wings of an Eagle, Overload, Juggernaut. I could list every single track on this album. I love this album. I think this album is flawless, frankly. The production is perfect, the vocals are perfect. Everything about this album is just, again, it's intense, it's riffy, but it's huge and anthemic. Like, this is, again, a perfect blend of new wave British heavy metal, speed metal, all combined into two. There's some like parts in here that are a little more kind of like thrash oriented too. Like this is like what I like about Raven, is that they are kind of classic heavy metal, but they're like the more intense brand of classic heavy metal. And yeah, this album I think is just an absolutely kick-ass album. Life's a Bitch, like again, like a comeback album, the end all comeback albums. This is an incredible album. Yeah, it is number one. Again, Wiped Out is very, very close, but honestly, I feel like this album took everything that was great about Wiped Out and just made it slightly better. Life's a Bitch, it's number one. It is a goddamn ass whooper of an album. And that concludes my discography ranking for the new wave of British heavy metal legends, Raven. So, if you made it to the end of this video, you are awesome and I appreciate you. Do consider leaving a like if you enjoyed this video, leave a comment down below, tell me do you agree with my thoughts on these albums, do you disagree, let me know down in the comments. If you're not subscribed, do consider subscribing because I do have a lot more content coming your way. And well, that about does it. I am just another heavy metal maniac. I'll see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, take care and have a great day. So long.